I never thought I'd be sharing this here, but I guess we all have that moment when life throws us into a situation we never saw coming. I'm a regular guy, just a husband and a father trying to live a simple life. I thought everything was pretty normal in our home until my world shattered. My wife, Sarah, and I have been married for 10 years. We met in college, hit it off right away, and got married a few years later. She was my rock, my best friend, and I never once doubted her love for me. We had 2 kids, Emily and Jake. Emily's 6 and Jake's 3. Life was, well, it was good, or at least I thought it was. Sarah and I both work full-time jobs, but I made sure to spend as much time as possible with the kids. I've always been the hands-on dad who enjoys playing with them, reading bedtime stories, and just being there. Sarah seemed to do the same, but in hindsight, maybe I was too focused on my work or our day-to-day lives to notice the cracks. It all started innocently enough one evening. I was sitting on the couch, minding my own business, watching TV. Emily came up to me, holding one of her stuffed animals. She looked a little troubled, which was unusual for her. I asked her what was wrong, thinking it was some typical kid problem like losing a toy or something. But what she said next made my heart stop. "Daddy," she said, her little voice hesitant. "Why was Mommy hugging that man when we went to the store? He wasn't you." At first, I didn't process it. I thought she was confused or just misunderstood something. Maybe it was a friendly hug between her and a coworker or someone we both knew. But Emily wasn't the type to make things up. She looked at me with such sincerity that I felt a pit forming in my stomach. "Where did you see this, sweetie?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. My heart was racing, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. "At the grocery store. We went yesterday after school," Emily said, her big eyes wide and innocent. "Mommy was talking to a man, and they hugged for a long time." I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone she hadn't seen in a while, a friend from the past, or a simple moment of affection. But something about the way Emily described it felt off. And that pit in my stomach started to grow. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with possibilities. I kept telling myself it was probably nothing. But deep down, something didn't sit right with me. Sarah had been acting a little different lately. Nothing drastic, just small changes. She had started spending more time on her phone, going out for errands more often, and sometimes coming home later than usual. I chalked it up to work stress, but now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I decided not to bring it up with Sarah right away. I wanted to be sure before I accused her of anything. I didn't want to blow up our marriage over a misunderstanding. But I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Over the next few days, I started paying more attention to her behavior. Sarah would spend a lot of time texting someone, smiling at her phone like she had some inside joke. When I asked her who she was talking to, she would shrug it off, saying it was just a group chat with friends. But I noticed how quickly she would lock her phone when I got close. It was subtle, but it was there. I even asked her about the grocery store, casually slipping it into the conversation. "Emily said she saw you at the store the other day. Who did you run into?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Her reaction was off. She hesitated for a split second before answering, something she never used to do. "Oh, just an old friend from work," she said, avoiding eye contact. Nothing important. That pit in my stomach grew even more. She was lying, I could feel it. But why? Why would she lie about something as simple as running into someone at the store? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on. I wasn't the paranoid type, but when your own child unknowingly drops a bombshell like that, it's hard to just move on. The thought of my wife, the woman I had built my life with, betraying me, it was something I couldn't fully accept, but I needed to know the truth. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started checking her phone when she wasn't around. I hated doing it. It felt wrong, like I was invading her privacy. But at that point, I felt like I had no choice. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just something to prove that I was either crazy or right. Unfortunately, I didn't find much at first. Her messages were pretty normal, nothing suspicious. But I wasn't ready to let it go just yet. That's when I noticed she had installed a new messaging app one had never seen before. It wasn't something we typically used, and I couldn't help but wonder why she had it. I tried opening it, but of course it was password protected. My gut told me that whatever she was hiding, it was in that app. I couldn't confront her without proof, so I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I needed to find a way into that app, and I needed it fast. I spent the next few days in a haze, trying to figure out my next move. Part of me felt guilty for snooping around, but the other part was driven by the need for answers. The only thing that kept me going was the gnawing feeling in my chest, the one telling me that something was seriously wrong. I didn't confront Sarah right away. Instead, I tried to act normal, keep things as they were while I dug deeper. I did some research online about how to bypass app passwords, and after a lot of trial and error, I finally found a way in. It wasn't easy, and I felt like I was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. When I finally accessed the messaging app, I was met with a flood of texts from an unknown number. My stomach twisted as I scrolled through the conversations. They were flirty, intimate, filled with inside jokes and late-night plans. My hands shook as I kept reading. The messages painted a picture I had refused to see. Sarah was having an affair. The guy she had been texting was someone I didn't recognize. He wasn't a coworker, at least not one I knew of, and from the looks of it, they had been seeing each other for months. There were messages about meeting up at hotels, errands that were really cover-ups for their secret rendezvous. My world came crashing down as I realized my wife wasn't just cheating. She was living a double life. I sat there, staring at my phone, numb. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind? I kept replaying the last few months in my head. Her sudden mood swings, the late nights, the excuses that didn't quite add up. I had brushed it off, told myself it was just work stress or the pressures of raising 2 kids. But now it was all too clear. She wasn't distant because of stress. She was distant because she was with someone else. For a while, I just sat there in disbelief, feeling like the walls were closing in on me. My entire marriage, everything I thought I knew about Sarah, felt like a lie. I couldn't even bring myself to cry. It was like my emotions had shut off, leaving me in a state of shock. But as the numbness faded, anger took its place. I wasn't the type to blow up, but I felt this deep, burning rage simmering beneath the surface. How could she do this to me? To our family? To our kids? I thought about Emily, about how she had unknowingly exposed the truth, and my heart broke all over again. She didn't deserve this. Neither of my kids did. I wanted to confront Sarah right then and there, but I held back. I needed to think. I needed to plan. I wasn't going to let my emotions get the best of me. Not yet. I wanted to be smart about this, to handle it in a way that wouldn't completely destroy my life or my children's lives. So I waited. I kept pretending like everything was fine, even though inside, I was a complete mess. I started paying more attention to Sarah's movements, watching her more closely. Every time she left the house, every time she smiled at her phone, I felt that rage bubble up again. But I kept it under control. I needed more information before I confronted her. A few days later, I got my chance. Sarah told me she was heading out to meet some friends for dinner, something she'd done plenty of times before. But now, after reading those texts, I knew what that meant. She wasn't going to meet her friends. She was going to meet him. I waited until she left, then grabbed my car keys and followed her. I felt like some kind of amateur detective, heart pounding as I kept a safe distance behind her. My palms were sweaty on the steering wheel as I watched her pull into a hotel parking lot, the same hotel I had seen mentioned in her messages. I parked a little further away and watched as she walked inside. She wasn't meeting friends. She wasn't running errands. She was meeting the guy she had been cheating on me with. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the entrance, my mind racing. I had proof now, real, undeniable proof. There was no more doubt, no more room for denial. My wife was a cheater, and now I had to figure out what to do about it. I drove back home in a daze, barely able to think straight. By the time I got home, Sarah still wasn't back, and I had hours to stew in my thoughts. I paced the living room, replaying everything over and over in my mind. Confronting her was inevitable. But how? How could I bring this up without exploding? Without completely losing it? When Sarah finally walked through the door, smiling like nothing was wrong, I felt the anger rise again. She looked at me, probably noticing how tense I was, and asked if everything was okay. For the first time, I couldn't pretend anymore. Couldn't hold it in. I took a deep breath and looked her straight in the eye. "We need to talk," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. Her face shifted from confusion to concern. She knew something was up. She had no idea that I had found out everything, but she knew enough to be worried. I could see it in her eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice hesitant. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at her, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal wash over me. This was it, the moment everything would change. I stood there, staring at her, trying to find the right words. It felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Part of me wanted to scream, to lay it all out right then and there, but another part of me wanted to hear what she had to say first, to give her a chance to explain. Maybe I was hoping against hope that there was some rational explanation, that I had misunderstood everything. But deep down, I knew better. "Where were you tonight?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I told you, I was out with some friends from work," she replied, her tone casual, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of unease. "Really? Which friends?" I pressed, my heart pounding in my chest. I watched her carefully, every small movement, every hesitation. She hesitated for just a second before answering. You don't know them, they're new hires at the office. It was just a casual dinner." Her voice was light, but there was a tightness to her smile. That hesitation was all I needed. It was the crack in her lie that confirmed everything I already knew. I felt my anger rising, but I kept my cool, at least for the moment. "You sure about that?" I asked, my voice cold now. "Because I followed you." Her face froze. The smile dropped instantly, replaced by a look of shock and panic. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. It was like she had been caught completely off guard, and for the first time, I saw her without the mask she had been wearing for so long. What do you mean you followed me?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a step closer, my hands shaking. "I followed you to the hotel," I said quietly. "I know everything, Sarah. I know about him." Her face went pale. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she just stood there, staring at me, her eyes wide with guilt. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped, like time had frozen between us. This was the moment I had been dreading, and now that it was here, I didn't know what to do. "Please," she finally whispered, her voice cracking. "Let me explain." I felt a wave of emotions hit me all at once. Anger, sadness, betrayal. I wanted to yell, to tell her how much she had hurt me, but instead, I just shook my head. "Explain? You want to explain this?" I asked, my voice rising. "You've been lying to me for months. You've been cheating behind my back while I've been here, taking care of our kids, thinking we were happy." She flinched at my words, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's not what you think," she said quickly. I never meant for this to happen." I laughed bitterly. "Never meant for it to happen? You've been seeing him for months, Sarah. You've been sneaking around, lying to my face. How could you say you didn't mean for it to happen?" "I know I messed up," she sobbed. "I know I made a huge mistake, but it's not what you think, I swear." "Then what is it?" I shot back. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been having an affair and using our kids as a cover." Her tears were flowing freely now, but I wasn't in the mood to feel sorry for her. She had brought this on herself. "It started as just talking," she said between sobs. "We were just friends at first, and I didn't think anything would happen. But then, things got out of control. I didn't know how to stop it." "You didn't know how to stop it?" I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. "You had a choice every single time, Sarah. Every time you texted him, every time you met up with him, you had a choice. And you chose to betray me." She covered her face with her hands, crying harder now. "I'm so sorry," she choked out. I didn't want to hurt you. Well, you did, I said coldly. You hurt me and you hurt our kids. Did you even think about them? About what this would do to them if they found out? She shook her head, her sobs growing louder. I never wanted this to happen. I love you, I love our family. I don't know why I did it. I stood there watching her cry, feeling numb. Her apologies felt hollow to me. It didn't matter how sorry she was now. She had already done the damage. And the worst part was that I couldn't even trust her words anymore. Every time she opened her mouth, all I could hear were more lies. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The silence between us was thick, heavy with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid for so long. I could hear the kids upstairs, oblivious to the storm that was brewing in their parents' lives. And for their sake, I knew I needed to hold it together. We need to figure out what happens next, I finally said, my voice quiet but firm. But I'm not ready to decide that right now. I need time. She nodded, still crying, unable to meet my eyes. I understand, she whispered. I'll do whatever you need. I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight, I said, walking toward the stairs. I don't want to talk about this anymore right now. As I made my way upstairs, I could still hear her sobbing softly in the living room, but I didn't turn back. Couldn't. My heart was shattered, and I wasn't sure it would ever be whole again. That night, as I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, I realized that my life would never be the same. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built a family with, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. And now, I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces of my broken marriage and my broken heart. The next few days were some of the hardest I've ever experienced. I felt like I was living in a fog, going through the motions of daily life while my mind replayed everything over and over again. Every time I looked at Sarah, I couldn't help but see her with him. I wondered if she thought about him when we were together, if she had been comparing us in ways I couldn't begin to understand. I kept my distance from her as much as I could. She apologized constantly, begging me to talk, to sit down and figure things out. But I wasn't ready for that. I couldn't stand to be around her, let alone have a conversation about how she had blown up our lives. Instead, I threw myself into work, spending extra hours at the office just so I wouldn't have to go home. It didn't take long for the tension to build. At first, we managed to keep things civil for the kids' sake. But I could tell Sarah was struggling with the silence between us. Every time I came home, she was either in tears or trying to force a conversation I wasn't ready for. One evening, about a week after the confrontation, she finally cornered me in the kitchen while I was grabbing something to eat. We can't keep doing this, you know? She said softly, her eyes red from crying. The kids are going to notice something is wrong. I sighed, leaning against the counter. She wasn't wrong. Emily had already started asking why I was sleeping in the guest room, and Tommy was picking up on the tension, too. I know, I said, my voice tired, but I'm not ready to have this conversation, Sarah. I need more time. She nodded, but I could see the frustration in her face. I just don't know what to do, she said, her voice breaking. I don't know how to fix this. I didn't respond right away. How could she fix this? There wasn't a magic solution to undo the betrayal, to erase the lies she'd told me. No amount of apologies could take away the pain I was feeling. I don't know if this can be fixed, I finally said, my words cutting through the silence between us. Her face crumpled, and she covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a sob. Don't say that, she whispered. Please don't say that. We can work through this. I'll do whatever it takes. I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't that I didn't want to believe her, but after everything that had happened, how could I ever trust her again? I just don't know, Sarah, I said quietly. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. Her tears flowed freely now, and she reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. I couldn't handle her touch. It felt wrong, like everything between us was tainted by what she had done. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice pleading. I'll go to counseling. I'll quit my job if I have to. Just please don't give up on us. I looked at her, feeling a mixture of anger and sorrow. "It's not that simple," I said. "You can't just snap your fingers and make everything okay. This isn't about your job or going to therapy. This is about the fact that you cheated, and you lied about it for months." "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I messed up, but I love you. I love our family. I don't want to lose you." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I had loved her once, deeply. I had built my life around her, around the family we had created together. But now I wasn't sure what I felt. "I need more time," I repeated, turning away from her. "I'm not ready to make any decisions yet." She didn't say anything else, just stood there, crying softly as I walked away. Over the next few weeks, things remained strained between us. We started talking again, but it was more out of necessity than anything else. We discussed the logistics of the house, the kids, and the day-to-day stuff, but anything deeper than that felt like stepping into a minefield. I could tell Sarah was trying. She was more attentive to the kids, more involved in their lives. She didn't go out anymore, not even for work-related events, and I noticed she deleted the messaging app she had been using to communicate with him. But no matter what she did, I couldn't shake the image of her with someone else. One night, while lying awake in the guest room, I decided to check up on her again. Part of me knew it was unhealthy to keep looking for evidence after I already knew the truth, but I couldn't stop myself. It was like I needed to keep reminding myself of what she had done, so I wouldn't get sucked back into the illusion that things could go back to normal. I checked her phone while she was sleeping, scrolling through her messages, her email, her social media. It was like a ritual now, one that I couldn't break. Every night, I needed to see for myself that she wasn't lying to me again. But that night, something caught my eye. It wasn't a message or an email this time. It was a photo. I opened it, my heart sinking as I realized what I was looking at. It was an old picture, one I hadn't seen before. Sarah was with him, the guy she had been cheating with. They were standing together, arms around each other, laughing at something. It looked innocent enough on the surface, but the date on the photo told me everything I needed to know. It was from over a year ago. I stared at the screen, feeling like I had been punched in the gut. This wasn't some recent fling. This wasn't a mistake that had just happened in the last few months. She had been seeing him for over a year, lying to me for even longer than I had thought. The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just an affair. It was a relationship. She had been with him for a year, and I had been completely oblivious. I dropped the phone, my hands shaking as the full weight of the betrayal came crashing down on me once again. I had been a fool, a complete and utter fool. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep living like this, waiting for the next lie to be uncovered. Sarah had destroyed everything we had built, and there was no going back. No matter how much she apologized, no matter how much she tried to make things right, it didn't change the fact that she had chosen him over me. The next morning, I woke up with a decision. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I couldn't keep dragging this out, torturing myself with questions and doubts. Sarah's affair wasn't some temporary lapse in judgment. It was something deeper, more sustained, and I knew that nothing she did or said would ever change what I'd discovered. It was time for me to take control of my life again. I stayed in the guest room, staring at the ceiling for a long time before getting up and quietly going about my morning routine. I made breakfast for the kids, got them ready for school, and dropped them off like I always did. But this time, I didn't head straight to work. Instead, I made a detour. I drove around aimlessly at first, my mind racing as I tried to figure out how to handle the conversation I knew was coming. Eventually, I found myself parked outside a lawyer's office. I'd seen the sign 100 times before, but had never imagined I'd need to walk through those doors. Yet here I was, taking a deep breath. I stepped out of the car and walked inside. I didn't know exactly what I wanted yet, but I needed to know my options. I couldn't let Sarah's decisions destroy me any more than they already had. I needed to protect myself and my kids. After a brief wait, I was led into a consultation room where I met with an attorney. She listened carefully as I explained the situation, my voice shaky as I recounted everything that had happened over the last few weeks. She was sympathetic but professional. After I finished talking, She outlined my options. Divorce, custody, division of assets. It all seemed overwhelming at first, but hearing it laid out in a straightforward way gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in a long time. "You don't have to make any decisions today," she said kindly, "but it's good to be informed, to understand what your rights are and how you can protect yourself and your children." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and fear. Divorce was a huge step, one that would change everything. But the thought of staying in this broken marriage felt even worse. I left the lawyer's office with a heavy heart but a clearer mind. I knew I had to confront Sarah and make it clear where I stood. No more avoiding the issue. No more pretending we could fix this with a few conversations and empty promises. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I found Sarah in the living room, sitting on the couch with her head in her hands. She looked up as I walked in, her face filled with anxiety. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. I could see her brace herself, knowing what was coming. "I know," she whispered. "I've been waiting for you to say that." I sat down across from her, keeping a distance between us. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The tension in the room was thick, almost suffocating. I could see the fear in her eyes, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. "I went to see a lawyer today," I said, watching her reaction closely. Her eyes widened, and she sat up straighter. "A lawyer?" she echoed, her voice trembling. "Yeah," I said, my tone blunt. "I needed to know what my options are because I can't keep doing this, Sarah. I can't live like this anymore." Tears immediately filled her eyes. "No, please don't do this," she pleaded. "We can still fix this. I'll do anything you want. Just don't give up on us." I shook my head, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. "I'm not sure there's anything left to fix," I said quietly. "You've been lying to me for over a year. A year, Sarah. This wasn't some one-time mistake. You had a relationship with him, and you kept it hidden even when I confronted you. How am I supposed to move past that?" She sobbed, her hands clutching her face. I know I messed up," she cried. "But I love you. I love our family. I don't want to lose you." "You already lost me," I said, my voice hard. "The moment you decided to be with him, you lost me." She shook her head frantically. "No, that's not true. I was confused. I was stupid. But I never stopped loving you. I swear it's over with him. It's been over since the day you found out." I didn't doubt that she had cut things off with him, but that didn't change what had happened. It didn't erase the lies, the betrayal, or the fact that she had chosen him over me for an entire year. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that you broke my trust," I said. "And trust is the foundation of everything. Without it, we have nothing." She sobbed harder, her shoulders shaking as she tried to compose herself. "What about the kids?" she whispered. "What are we going to do about them? We can't just tear our family apart." I swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in my throat at the mention of the kids. I hadn't made any decisions about custody or how we were going to navigate that yet. But I knew one thing for sure. Staying in a toxic, broken marriage wasn't going to do them any good. "I love our kids more than anything," I said. "But I don't think staying together for their sake is the right answer. They deserve to grow up in a home where their parents are happy and healthy, not one where there's constant tension and distrust." Sarah didn't say anything for a while, just sat there crying. I could see the desperation in her eyes, but I also knew that staying together out of guilt or fear wasn't the answer. "I need space," I finally said. "I'm not saying I've made a final decision yet, but I need time away from you to figure things out." Her face crumpled, and she nodded slowly. "If that's what you need," she whispered, "I'll do whatever it takes." I stood up, feeling the weight of the conversation pressing down on me. "I'll stay in the guest room for now," I said. "We'll figure out the details later." She nodded again, wiping her tears. "Thank you for at least giving me a chance." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure I was giving her a chance. I was just trying to navigate the mess she had created. The next few days were tense but quiet. Sarah and I barely spoke, and I spent most of my time focused on the kids. They could sense that something was off, but they didn't know the full extent of what was happening. I wasn't ready to explain it to them yet, not until I knew for sure what the future held. But deep down, I was already leaning toward one outcome. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my life would never be the same with Sarah. Even if I stayed, the trust between us was gone, shattered beyond repair. The truth was, I wasn't sure I could ever look at her the same way again. A few days passed, and the tension in the house became unbearable. Every time I was near Sarah, it felt like I was suffocating under the weight of all the unspoken words, all the unresolved pain. We moved around each other like ghosts, pretending to hold things together for the sake of the kids. But inside, I was already checked out. I couldn't unsee the betrayal. I couldn't unhear the lies. One evening, as I was tucking my son into bed, he looked up at me with those wide, innocent eyes. "Dad, is everything okay? You and Mom seem different." I felt my heart break a little more. This was exactly what I didn't want. I had tried so hard to shield them from the fallout, but kids are smart. They pick up on everything. The last thing I wanted was for them to carry the burden of our problems. I forced a smile, brushing his hair back gently. "Everything's fine, buddy," I said, my voice steady even though inside I was crumbling. "Mom and I are just going through a rough patch. But don't worry, we both love you and your sister more than anything." He seemed to accept my answer, though I could see the worry lingering in his eyes. After he fell asleep, I lingered by his bed for a few moments, watching him breathe softly. It was moments like this that made everything harder. I didn't want to tear apart the family we had built. I didn't want to cause my kids any more pain. But staying in a toxic, broken marriage would only be worse in the long run. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of resolve. I couldn't keep dragging this out, living in limbo. I had to make a decision, for my own sanity and for the well-being of my kids. After dropping them off at school, I headed back to the house. Sarah was in the kitchen, making herself a cup of coffee. She glanced at me nervously, clearly sensing that something was about to happen. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. She nodded, setting her cup down. "I've been waiting for you to say that." We sat down at the dining table, the silence between us thick with tension. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "I've made a decision," I began. "I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've realized that I can't move past what happened. I can't rebuild the trust that you broke. And I don't think staying together just for the kids is the right thing to do." Sarah's face crumpled, and she covered her mouth with her hands, stifling a sob. I could see the devastation in her eyes, but I felt no pity. I had given her every chance to come clean, to be honest, and she had thrown it all away. "So, what does this mean?" she asked, her voice shaky. "It means I'm filing for divorce," I said bluntly. "I'll move out as soon as we figure out a custody arrangement for the kids. I don't want to drag this out any longer." She burst into tears, her body shaking with the force of her sobs. "Please don't do this," she cried. "I know I messed up, but we can still fix this. We can go to therapy, we can work through it. Just don't give up on us." "I'm not giving up," I said quietly. "You gave up the moment you decided to cheat. This isn't something we can fix with a few therapy sessions. The trust is gone, Sarah. And without that, we have nothing." She cried harder, but I felt numb. I had spent weeks drowning in my emotions, but now, all I felt was a cold detachment. The love I had once felt for her had been replaced by resentment and a deep sense of betrayal. Over the next few days, we started the painful process of untangling our lives. I reached out to the lawyer again, filing the necessary paperwork to start the divorce proceedings. Sarah, to her credit, didn't fight me on it. She knew this was the end. We sat down with the kids together, explaining to them in the gentlest way possible that Mom and Dad were going to live apart, but that we still loved them more than anything. It was the hardest conversation I've ever had. My daughter cried, clinging to Sarah, while my son sat there, silent and confused. I wanted to protect them from the pain, but there was no way to avoid it. The only thing I could do was be there for them, to reassure them that they weren't losing both of their parents. After that, I moved out. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I found a small apartment nearby so I could still see the kids regularly, and we worked out a shared custody arrangement. Sarah and I kept things civil, at least for the kids' sake, but I avoided her as much as possible. In the quiet of my new place, I found myself alone with my thoughts more often than I liked. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. How had things gotten to this point? How had I missed the signs for so long? I replayed every moment, every conversation, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. But the truth was, it didn't matter anymore. There was no going back. No amount of reflection could change what had happened. One evening, while I was scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself, I got a message from an old friend. He'd heard about the divorce and wanted to check in. We hadn't talked in years, but I appreciated the gesture. We ended up talking for a while, catching up on life, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of normalcy. It reminded me that there was life beyond this mess, that I still had friends, a support system, and a future ahead of me. Weeks passed, and gradually I began to heal. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of everything still felt overwhelming. But little by little, I was starting to rebuild my life. I spent as much time as I could with the kids, trying to be the best father I could be for them. One evening, I was tucking my daughter into bed when she looked up at me with a soft smile. "Daddy, are you happy?" she asked, her voice so innocent, yet so full of understanding. I paused, taken aback by her question. "I'm getting there," I said honestly. "But no matter what happens, you and your brother are the best thing in my life, and I'll always be here for you." She nodded, her eyes heavy with sleep. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered, before drifting off. I sat by her bedside for a long time that night, watching her sleep. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy, but I knew I was doing the right thing. For myself, for my kids, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with my decision.